So, here in London, I guess I shouldn't have been too surprised when I was just like walking down the street and this Thai place, Thai Square, it's a chain, has a little plaque, and the plaque says, built in 1625. This is the only building on the Strand to have survived the Great Fire of London in 1666. So I was like, cool, that's interesting. Why is it a Thai restaurant? If this were in America, it would be a museum. And here, it's just still in use. London's a city that's really known for its history, right? It's this palimpsest. Every thing in London is on the bones of an older thing. Londinium was built by the Romans in 43 CE. It was part of the Roman Empire, and then it wasn't part of the Roman Empire, and then it was ruled by the French, and then it was ruled by the English, and then it was ruled by English people who spoke French. There's all these different versions of the city that have been built on each other over time. A building that's been around since 1625 is a building that has lived through a lot of these different ideas of what London can be. So I thought I'd try and see what this place had been. The first clue is the stained glass windows in the front of this building, right? They say the Wig and Pen Club. So, turns out the Wig and Pen Club was a private club, so I looked it up, and I just found a Guardian article about the Wig and Pen Club. The article claimed that it was built as the house of the gatekeeper of Temple Bar. The Temple Bar is known as being where traitors' heads were stuck on spikes. Apparently, the gatekeeper of Temple Bar, who lived in 229 Strand, would sell meat and bread to the crowds that would form. Here we have a sort of narrative that really seems to follow this idea of the changing London throughout the years. Built in 1625 in a city that is the seat of a monarchy, 229 Strand was built for the duty of the monarch. By the 20th century, it had become a private club. It's still an aristocratic institution that feels like it should be typical of a class-divided but more democratic society. And then by the 21st century, as Britain is becoming a more and more diverse international place, and these sort of old class hierarchies are gradually becoming maybe outmoded, more full of immigrants. You have Thai people running a restaurant. The institutions aren't gone. It still has these stained glass windows with, inscriptions about how God blesses the work of journalists and lawyers, which seems unlikely, but, whatever. So that's the surface narrative, right? But is this actually true? I was not able to find any other credible sources that this building was built as the house of the gatekeeper of Temple Bar. And it seems pretty unlikely that a gatekeeper did live there, because on the listing of why it's a Class 2 historical building, it indicates that it's valuable for how typical it is. 17th century London was full of these wooden buildings where the second story hangs out over the street. The Wig and Pen Club was 95 years old at the time it closed in 2003. There's almost 300 years there before the Wig and Pen Club was actually founded. So I went to the British Library to try and see what I could, dredge up. So it turns out this place, before it was owned by the Wig and Pen Club, was owned by this guy, William Thomas Prout, who didn't seem to be particularly interesting or have any achievements. He sort of sold it when he was young to move out to the countryside and be a farmer. The house had actually been in his family for a couple generations. His father, John Prout, was known for innovating in farming. He wrote a book on how to farm cereal crops intensively over years on the same plot of land. And although he owned this building, 229 Strand, his whole life, it seems he spent most of his time out on his farm. His uncle, though, Thomas Prout, ran a patent medicine business. They sold gout medication, all sorts of hair dyes, and other general products all over the world. For years, there was an apothecary shop. You'd walk in, you could buy medication, get your gout cured, whatever. Thomas Prout was a radical. And that was a technical term in the 1800s in England. A radical was someone who worked towards reform, which in this case meant voting by secret ballot so that you're not coerced into voting for the noble and getting the vote to everyone, not just landowners. This was all about having urban people and manufacturers and the middle class who are not landed gentry to have representation in Parliament. He also was a patron of Richard Carlile, who was arrested for publishing radical newspapers, served years in jail, was one of the people to secure the freedom of press in Britain, was a firebrand atheist who hung out with the devil's pastor, converted late in his life, and Thomas Prout was the only one of his patrons who stayed with him till the end. William Thomas seems to have moved out by like 1914. The Whig and Pen Club was apparently started in 1908. We sort of have more of a picture of what actually happened in this building, right? And it didn't go from a civic institution of monarchy to a patriarchal old boys club to a democratic eatery. It went from maybe a gatehouse or maybe just someone's house to a place of commerce for the middle class where people who advocated for a more democratic nation lived and worked, back into this sort of old boys club thing to a restaurant. But the Whig and Pen Club wasn't a traditional gentleman's club either. The Whig and Pen Club essentially emerged into existence because the Royal Courts of Justice was built across the street. Fleet Street was known as the street of journalists, and the Strand was known as the street of legal proceedings. This meeting point where the Strand meets Fleet Street, opposite the Royal Courts of Justice, was sort of a neutral ground where lawyers would come and meet with journalists and sell them the most salacious stories they heard in court. This isn't good old boys territory where, like, lawyers would come in and, powder their wigs. This would be like, Jimmy, you'll never guess what I heard in court today. Someone just fucking chopped his wife's head off with an axe. And then Jimmy would be like, oh, I'll give you 32 shillings for more information. I would want to be there. I think that would be a pretty cool place to hang out. So the narrative is not from monarchy to deep class hierarchy to global democratic. There's ups and downs. The narrative isn't as clear. And that's how it should be, right? That makes sense. As much as you can go like, what's the idea of London? What is London? If you've lived your whole life in London, like, London isn't like an idea to you. It's a place. So here I am in Times Square, 229 Strand. It seems like this place may not be like, a microcosm that tells the story of London. It can't really necessarily just teach us everything there is to know about the history of London through the years, but it's only in London, or a place like London, that a place like this could exist. And this place does have one other sort of purpose to it, which is it's a place where you can get some pretty good Thai food and think about hundreds of years worth of other people who have all been in the same place doing different things over the years, but right here